black woman called security, threat for asking water. She cut their 3.5B. Funding. Welcome to today's gripping tale, a story of injustice, resilience, and sweet, unexpected retribution. Meet Alistair Morgan, a successful tech entrepreneur and philanthropist on her way through Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. A simple request for water spirals into a shocking confrontation as she's labeled a security threat, ushered into a humiliating ordeal at the hands of overzealous airport staff. But little do they know, Alistair holds more power than they could ever fathom. When the truth comes to light, those who tried to belittle her will face the fallout in ways they never expected. This saga, fueled by audacity and truth, is one you won't want to miss. Alistair Morgan took a deep, steadying breath as she stepped out of the hired car onto the busy curb of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Her driver, Jonas, quickly retrieved her single rolling suitcase from the trunk. The late August sun bore down on them both, a reminder of Atlanta's fierce summer heat. Alistair smoothed the front of her pale blue silk blouse, made sure her black pencil skirt was neatly in place, and glanced at the monstrous airport complex that loomed above her. At 33, Alistair was already a force to be reckoned with in the tech industry. She was the co-founder of a growing cybersecurity startup, Titan Lock, which specialized in cutting-edge solutions for major corporations, many of which had government contracts. The success of Titan Lock was only part of her story. She was also a philanthropist, having established the Morgan Justice Foundation, an organization that provided grants for educational and entrepreneurial programs in underserved communities. On top of that, Alistair had been tapped for a high-profile government advisory panel, rumored to be funneling billions of dollars into modernization initiatives across U.S. airports. This new panel, operating with partial oversight from the Department of Transportation, was tasked with awarding strategic funding to various airports around the country, funding that hovered around $3.5 billion for the biggest infrastructure upgrades. The day's itinerary was straightforward. Alistair had a quick flight to Washington, D.C., for a meeting with the Advisory Council. She planned to finalize some points about equitable hiring practices within airport projects. Then it was a red-eye flight to London for an emergency conference with an international cybersecurity client. The schedule was tightly packed, leaving little room for unexpected snags. As Alistair stepped onto the sidewalk, she recalled the words of her mother, the late Dr. Eliza Morgan. "Walk like you own the place, but never forget who you are." This mantra had carried Alistair through countless boardrooms, filled with skeptics who hadn't expected a young black woman to be at the helm of a multi-million-dollar firm. In those rooms, Alistair learned to project confidence while maintaining empathy, always aware of the bigger picture, her ultimate goal of uplifting others and creating opportunities, especially for women of color in STEM fields. She smiled discreetly, adjusting the watch on her wrist, a custom piece given to her by a non-profit she funded. The watch face displayed the same words from her mother, etched in graceful cursive. "Never forget who you are." Feeling the vibration of her phone in her purse, Alistair fished it out. A text from her operations manager scrolled across the screen. "Safe travels, boss lady." "Kill it in D.C." Jonas offered her the handle of her suitcase. "Anything else you need, Miss Morgan?" "That's it," Alistair replied, pressing a crisp bill into his hand. "Thanks so much. Take care." "Always a pleasure," he said, tipping his cap. Alistair rolled the suitcase behind her, weaving through a mosaic of fellow travelers, families lugging strollers, college students clutching backpacks, business executives, chatting into earpieces. In the distance, she spotted a large overhead sign labeled with bold letters, South Security Checkpoint. Her flight was departing from Concourse E, so she headed in that direction, bracing herself for the usual airport rigmarole. The line for security was longer than usual. Alistair glanced at her watch. She had arrived 2 hours early, wanting to avoid the anxiety of a rushed check-in. As she shuffled forward, she felt the dryness in her throat intensify. She hadn't had time for coffee or water that morning, and she'd been on back-to-back calls. All she wanted was a quick drink before the final push through security. Finally, after 20 minutes of inching through the line, Alistair reached a point where she was close to a uniformed Transportation Security Administration (TSA) officer who was directing passengers. She thought it prudent to ask where she could step out for a water fountain, or at least a kiosk to buy a bottle of water. Catching the officer's eye, she approached with a polite smile. "Excuse me, sir. Is there a nearby water fountain or vending machine? I'm feeling a bit dehydrated." The officer, a tall man with a stern face named Carter, according to the embroidered patch on his uniform, eyed her up and down, clearly unimpressed by her request. "You're not allowed to leave the line once you're at this point," he said curtly. Alistair managed a polite response. "I understand that, but I'm not trying to skip the line. I just need to grab some water and come back. Is that permissible?" Carter's lips tightened. "You can't. If you leave this line, you'll have to start over at the back." His tone indicated the conversation was over, but Alistair pressed gently. "It's just water, He cut her off. "Ma'am, I said no." Alistair felt a low flame of irritation flare in her chest, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She wasn't looking for conflict, just a bit of water. It struck her as oddly rigid. Airport lines typically allowed re-entry if you explained your situation. However, Alistair recognized this might be a matter of differing TSA policies or simply an officious agent. She decided to accept it and keep moving. Just as she moved forward, a different TSA officer, a petite woman with a friendlier disposition, motioned for Alistair to come through the rope partition. "I can direct you to a water fountain if you're not feeling well," she said in a low, concerned voice. Relieved Alistair flashed a grateful smile. "Thank you so much. I appreciate that." She began to follow the helpful officer, whose name tag read Hernandez around the edge of the line, when Officer Carter spun around, his posture rigid. "Officer Hernandez." "What are you doing?" he barked. "She's feeling dehydrated," Hernandez replied. "I'm showing her." Carter's glare silenced Hernandez. He turned back to Alistair, eyes brimming with suspicion. "Ma'am, I need you to stand still right there." Alistair raised an eyebrow. "I'm just following her to the fountain." She offered to show me the way. "Are you disobeying a direct instruction from a TSA officer?" Carter's voice boomed. Several heads in the nearby lines turned to witness the commotion. Alistair blinked in disbelief, the sense of drama accelerating far too rapidly. "I didn't disobey anything," she managed her voice even. "We have a potential security concern," Carter hissed into his radio. "Requesting backup at the South Security Checkpoint." Alistair's heart began to pound. A security concern. Over water. A second officer arrived quickly, followed by an Atlanta police officer stationed at the airport. Alistair's mind raced. She'd done nothing wrong. She had not even raised her voice. Why was she suddenly labeled a threat? Passengers queued up behind her, exchanged nervous glances. Some stepped back as if Alistair might indeed be some kind of dangerous person. Alistair wanted to scream at the absurdity of it, but she forced herself to remain composed. She gave a calm, albeit tense, explanation to the newly arrived backup. "I only asked for water. The other officer said she would show me a fountain. That's all." Officer Carter, however, was not listening. He had found a bone to chew on, and he wasn't letting go. "You are creating a disturbance. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," he said, gesturing to a roped-off area by the scanner. The implied threat was clear: comply, or be forced to comply. Alistair sensed the shift in the air. She was a black woman, well-dressed, well-spoken, but still a black woman. She'd faced microaggressions before, but this situation felt more explosive. Her pulse throbbed in her temples as she reminded herself, "Stay calm. Don't escalate." She followed the direction to the roped-off area. People were watching. Anxiety gnawed at her. She had an important meeting in D.C. to finalize. Why was this happening? Alistair inhaled slowly, trying to maintain an aura of composure while her stomach flipped. Officer Carter began a cursory pat-down, running gloved hands over Alistair's waist and hips. Alistair stood with her arms out, eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. She tried to ignore the stares from the security line. Her thoughts spun. What if they detain me? What if I miss my flight? Hernandez attempted to intervene. "Carter, I already told you she just wanted water. There's no—" "Back off," Carter snapped. "I'm doing my job." He turned his attention to Alistair. "Ma'am, do you have any liquids in your carry-on?" She shook her head. "No, I only have my laptop, some documents and personal items." "Open the bag." Alistair handed over her sleek black briefcase. She watched as Carter unzipped it, rummaged through her neatly organized files, rummaging through zipped compartments. Alistair's cheeks burned at the invasion of her privacy. A second officer rifled through her purse, pulling out her wallet and phone, placing them on a table with a disinterested scowl. Finally, Carter gave her a nod. "Now remove your shoes. But we haven't even reached the X-ray machine yet." He narrowed his eyes. "I said remove your shoes." Alistair complied, stepping out of her low heels. Her bare feet touched the cold, tiled floor. She tried to remember if any official regulation required this at the pre-scan area, but her memory only recalled that standard procedure was to remove shoes at the X-ray conveyor belt. This was humiliating, no doubt about it. It felt punitive, like an officer flexing power in an unwarranted way. A female officer approached, presumably to complete a more thorough pat-down. Alistair's pulse hammered in her ears. She was asked to raise her arms again, then stand with her legs apart. The officer patted and pressed, checking for concealed items. Alistair's slender frame trembled not from cold, but from a sense of outrage, carefully tamped down to avoid further escalation. TSA supervisors eventually converged on the scene, wanting an explanation. Passengers in the lines started to whisper, some pulled out their phones to record. Alistair briefly locked eyes with one passenger, a young woman who gave Alistair a sympathetic nod, as if to say, "I see you." Alistair nodded back, tears threatening to well in her eyes. When it was all over, an ordeal that lasted a humiliating 15 minutes, Alistair stood in her stocking feet, seething with quiet indignation. Carter tossed her shoes to the floor in front of her, with an air of triumph. "You can go now," he said. "Move along," Officer Alistair said, fighting to keep her voice level. There was no reason for any of this. "I will be filing a complaint." Carter shrugged. "You do that." Alistair collected her belongings, her fingers shaking. She slipped her heels back on, took her bag, and stepped forward to where the normal screening lines progressed. 2 different TSA officers quickly ushered her onto the X-ray conveyor belt area. Within seconds, Alistair was cleared with no issues. She retrieved her suitcase off the belt, took a moment to steady herself, and walked toward her gate. But she couldn't shake the sense of profound violation, and underneath it, a rising anger. This is not over. Alistair told herself that. Little did Officer Carter know, Alistair had a meeting in D.C. concerning major funding for airport modernization and personnel training. The irony was too thick. Alistair had for months championed the idea that TSA and other airport workers needed better training in diversity and de-escalation. She had recommended substantial funds be allocated to these programs, that the very system she was trying to help had just dehumanized her. It filled her with a righteous sense of purpose. She had a choice. She could chalk this up as another instance of discrimination and let it slide, or she could use her platform and influence to ensure nobody else suffered a similar humiliation. Alistair, steeling her spine, decided on the latter. Once Alistair reached her gate, she sank into a vinyl airport chair and tried to compose herself. She rummaged through her purse for a moment and found her phone. Her immediate urge was to call someone, perhaps her friend Danielle, who was also an attorney focusing on civil rights cases in Atlanta. Danielle would surely be outraged and ready to pounce with legal measures, but Alistair paused, inhaling deeply, realizing she needed more information. She needed to approach this strategically. Emotion, while valid, might cloud her tactical response. Instead, Alistair opened her phone's voice memo app and began dictating the sequence of events, the time, the place, the names of officers. If she remembered them, the humiliating details. She recorded it in as calm and precise a manner as possible, wanting the details to remain untainted by the swirl of anger in her gut. Once she felt satisfied she'd captured the facts. Alistair ended the recording. She scanned the gate area for a water fountain. Finally, she saw one near the restrooms. The irony struck her again. She'd only asked for water in the security line, something so simple. She rose carefully, guarded her phone in her purse, and headed for that much-needed drink of water. Back in the waiting area, Alistair tried to refocus on the upcoming meeting in D.C. She would face a room of high-profile government officials, each with a stake in how airport modernization funds were allocated. Her role was to ensure cybersecurity was front and center, but she had also advocated strongly for better staff training, particularly in areas related to implicit bias, de-escalation, and conflict resolution. Alistair had always believed that secure airports aren't just about preventing terror threats. They're about the dignity and fair treatment of every passenger. The overhead speaker announced boarding would begin in 5 minutes for her flight. Alistair turned her phone off silent mode. Immediately it buzzed with a call from her executive assistant, Rebecca. "Hey, Alistair," greeted, striving for normalcy in her tone. "Hey, Alistair, just checking you got through security. Okay? You've got a jam-packed day once you land in D.C., Rebecca said. Alistair considered telling her about what had just happened. Rebecca was more than an assistant. She was a friend and confidant. But Alistair didn't want to derail the day's agenda with her personal tribulations just yet. "I'm fine," Alistair said. "Security was a bit of a nightmare, but I'll manage." "How's everything else? All set?" Rebecca answered. "Mr. Delgado's team confirmed they'll meet you at 2 p.m. in the Rayburn building. Also, I got an email from Senator Atwater's office. She wants a quick pre-meeting with you if possible, something about a new compliance clause for the airport budget." Alistair's shoulders tensed. The news about Senator Atwater was timely. The senator was known for championing anti-discrimination policies. Alistair would certainly have something to share about her morning's experience. Alistair's flight was uneventful, a relief after the drama at the Atlanta checkpoint. She typed up a quick summary of her experience on the plane, adding more detail to the voice memo notes. She debated whether to call out Carter by name, but ultimately decided she'd let any official complaint or investigation handle the specifics. Her flight touched down smoothly at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Alistair grabbed her suitcase, jumped into a black SUV waiting curbside, and sped off toward the heart of Capitol Hill. By 1:45 p.m., Alistair was briskly walking into the Rayburn House office building, a tall structure housing many of the nation's lawmakers and their staff. Rebecca met her in the lobby, wearing a fitted grey suit, balancing Alistair's schedule on a tablet. She greeted Alistair with a quick hug. "You okay, boss? You look tense." "I'm managing," Alistair answered, not wishing to linger on her own trauma. "Let's get this done." They took an elevator to the 12th floor, where they were ushered into a large conference room, lined with heavy wooden chairs. A long oval table dominated the space, and at least a dozen people already sat around it. Staffers, consultants, and a few members of the official Airport Modernization and Compliance Panel. Senator Atwater, a stately woman in her early 50s with a shock of white hair at her temples, beckoned Alistair over. "Ms. Morgan, good to see you." Her tone was warm, but her face bore a seriousness Alistair couldn't miss. Alistair gave a small bow of respect. "Senator, thank you for having me. I'm ready to discuss the cybersecurity initiatives and anything else on the agenda." As Alistair settled into a seat, a hush fell over the room. Senator Atwater cleared her throat, drumming slender fingers on a dossier in front of her. "Before we dive into the modernization projects, I'd like to address an important matter. We've had more than a few reports of unprofessional and discriminatory behavior at major airports nationwide. The Department of Transportation has flagged these incidents as potential liabilities if left unchecked." The senator locked eyes with Alistair, as if inviting her to speak. Alistair hesitated. She was still reeling from her personal ordeal. The thought of recounting it in this setting made her stomach twist, yet her moral compass urged her forward. She was here now, in the right place to make a difference. Alistair inhaled, then spoke, projecting her voice with the confidence honed by years of boardroom negotiations. "Senator Atwater, I can confirm that discrimination in airport settings is not merely anecdotal. It's a pervasive issue. In fact, I myself was recently subjected to invasive and unjust treatment by TSA officers at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International." A murmur traveled around the table. A few heads whipped up, eyebrows raised. One man in a pinstriped suit shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Senator Atwater nodded, her lips pursed. "Would you care to elaborate?" Alistair spent the next 15 minutes detailing the humiliating experience. She kept her voice measured, though inside she was recalling the sting of injustice. She didn't name the specific officer, focusing instead on the overall breakdown in procedure and respect. She wove her personal story into a larger theme: airports that fail to train their staff to handle basic human interactions with respect pose a threat not only to civil rights but also to national security. Distrust undermines the entire system. When she finished, the room was silent. Senator Atwater pressed her palms together, a sign of deliberate contemplation. "I'm sorry you experienced that, Miss Morgan," she said, her eyes flitting around the table. "What you've described is not just an isolated incident, and it's exactly the type of behavior we need to root out." A middle-aged man named Alec Matthews, who served as a liaison between the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Transportation, chimed in. These are serious allegations. We can't have a situation where potential biases hamper security measures. Our modernization plan isn't just about physical infrastructure. It has to include upgrading our approach to passenger interaction. That means training oversight and accountability. Senator Atwater nodded. And that's where Ms. Morgan's expertise and philanthropic focus come in. She's been advocating for robust training programs. Given her direct experience, I believe we should strongly consider her recommendations and perhaps tie compliance to the new wave of funding. Another wave of murmurs swelled around the table. Alistair looked from face to face, reading their expressions. The notion of tying compliance measures to funding was a big step. For some airports, that could mean hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in modernization grants. Alistair's mind flitted to her humiliating morning at the Atlanta checkpoint. She remembered the vow she made. This is not over. If legislation demanded that airports enforce zero-tolerance policies for discrimination with failure resulting in withheld or reduced funds, that would be a groundbreaking shift. Alistair cleared her throat. Senator, if the panel is open to hearing a formal proposal, I'd be honored to draft guidelines that link training and accountability measures with the disbursement of funds. This is urgent. Our airports serve as gateways to the nation, and they must reflect our highest values. Atwater's expression brightened. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Let's do precisely that. News travels fast in political circles, especially when billions of dollars in airport funding are on the line. By the time Alistair wrapped up her day of meetings in D.C. and boarded her flight to London, phone calls were being made from one office to another in Atlanta. Word was out that Alistair Morgan, whom some knew as a philanthropic angel and others knew as a tough negotiator, was drafting guidelines that could overhaul how airports like Hartsfield-Jackson trained and disciplined their employees. Back at Hartsfield-Jackson, the shift supervisor, a man named Henry Monroe, overheard the chatter. An old friend at City Hall mentioned that Alistair Morgan's name kept surfacing specifically in discussions about tying a major chunk of airport funding to improved staff conduct. Monroe's jaw dropped as he realized Alistair Morgan was likely the same woman who'd had that confrontation with Officer Carter. Panic threaded through Monroe's thoughts. A potential $3.5 billion infusion was on the line funds that were essential for remodeling terminals, upgrading technology, improving traffic flow, and ironically training personnel. Without it, the airport's carefully laid plans for future expansions could stall out, leaving them at a massive disadvantage. Monroe quickly began investigating. He retrieved the security footage from that morning, hoping it would exonerate the airport from Alistair's claims. Instead, he cringed at what he saw Alistair being singled out. Officer Carter's harsh demeanor, the humiliating shoe removal before the official checkpoint. The footage reinforced Alistair's account and highlighted Carter's overreaction. Monroe's heart sank. If Alistair's story went public, it could cause a media firestorm. He wasted no time. Grabbing his phone, Monroe dialed the internal line for the TSA manager at Hartsfield-Jackson, Andrew Powell. Powell picked up on the first ring. "What's going on?" Monroe. Monroe updated Powell, who let out a low whistle. "That's bad. Carter's been on our radar for some time. Excessive complaints, borderline conduct. This might blow up big. Let me see what I can do from my end." Monroe paced in his office, running a hand over his short, cropped hair. He sensed a hurricane forming on the horizon. If Alistair Morgan had the ear of Senator Atwater and the Airport Modernization and Compliance Panel Hartsfield-Jackson, might find itself at the epicenter of a scandal that could cost them billions. Meanwhile, Alistair's flight to London sped across the Atlantic. She reclined her seat slightly, closing her eyes, although her mind refused to rest. The swiftness of events, one humiliating episode morphing into a potential sea change in policy, startled her. She'd always believed in effecting systematic change, but she never anticipated being the catalyst in quite this manner. A flight attendant came by with a tray of drinks. "Ma'am, would you like something to drink?" Alistair opened her eyes and smiled politely. "Yes, just some water, please." She paused, noticing the swirl of irony in her request. Water, how such a simple need had started this entire chain reaction. As she took a sip of the chilled water, Alistair allowed herself a brief flashback to that humiliating moment with Officer Carter. She recalled his old eyes and authoritarian tone. A part of her wanted vengeance. Yet Alistair also prided herself on fairness. Not all TSA officers were like Carter. She knew that. Some truly cared about passenger safety and treated people with respect, like Officer Hernandez, who had initially tried to help. Alistair needed to keep the bigger picture in focus. How do we ensure no one else experiences such unwarranted treatment? In London, Alistair was set to attend a cybersecurity conference for a major multinational client. The trip was important. Titan Lock needed to solidify its standing in the European market. She reviewed her notes, cross-checking them with Rebecca's bullet points. Despite her attempts to focus her thoughts, drifted back to the drama unfolding in the States. She couldn't help but wonder how quickly the wheels of change would turn, and whether the airport leadership in Atlanta was already squirming about the potential ramifications of losing $3.5 billion in funding. Over the next few days, Alistair found herself juggling crisis calls about the airport situation alongside her cybersecurity presentations. Every night, after exhausting days at the conference, she'd slip into her London hotel room and open up her laptop, sifting through an ever-growing stack of emails. One email from Senator Atwater's office caught her attention. Subject: urgent draft proposals and upcoming committee hearing. From Office of Senator Atwater, Ms. Morgan. The committee would like to see a preliminary outline of your recommended policies for linking anti-discrimination training and accountability measures to the new airport funding. Please send us a draft within the next 48 hours. We also have a hearing scheduled next week. We'd be grateful if you could testify either in person or via remote video. Thank you. Mark Dwyer, Chief of Staff. Alistair stared at the message, feeling the weight of responsibility and a flicker of excitement. She was being asked to shape policy at a national level. If done right, this could be a landmark decision that would not only enforce better behavior, but also possibly catalyze a shift in how airports across the country handled implicit bias. She set to work drafting an outline. Her proposal was straightforward but firm. 1. Mandatory sensitivity training. All security personnel and customer-facing airport staff must complete periodic anti-discrimination training. 2. Real-time accountability. Implementation of body cameras or continuous security footage reviews to ensure protocols are followed. Any repeated misconduct results in immediate dismissal or reassignment. 3. Passenger advocate. Protocol. Creation of an on-site passenger advocate or ombudsman at major airports who can mediate in real time if passengers feel they're being mistreated. 4. Funding contingencies. If an airport fails to reduce complaints related to discriminatory conduct by a set percentage each quarter, a portion of the allocated modernization funds can be withheld until compliance improves. Alistair titled the proposal Passenger Dignity and Security Act, Funding Contingency Measures. She saved a copy and sent it to Senator Atwater's staff, CCing relevant members of the panel. No sooner had she sent the email than her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello, Ms. Morgan. This is Andrew Powell, TSA manager at Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. I hope it's all right that I obtained your contact information through official channels." His tone was measured, almost nervous. Alistair remained guarded. "All right, Mr. Powell. How can I help you?" Powell cleared his throat. "I want to extend my apologies for the incident you experienced. We're investigating, and it's my understanding that certain officers acted out of protocol. Hartsfield-Jackson, as an institution, does not condone that behavior." Alistair recognized a damage control call when she heard one. "I appreciate that, Mr. Powell, but apologies won't rectify the systemic issues that allowed this to happen." Powell sighed. "Indeed, Ms. Morgan. We're ready to take steps, significant steps, to ensure this doesn't recur. I'd like to invite you to meet with our leadership team. Possibly we can come to some form of agreement, or at least demonstrate our commitment to change." Alistair let his words hang in the air for a moment. She understood the subtext. They need me to relent or risk losing billions. After a pause, she replied, "I'm currently in London on business, but I'll be back in the States soon. Let's see how the legislative process unfolds. I have a hearing next week to discuss these funding contingencies." Powell's voice cracked slightly. "Yes, I'm aware. We sincerely hope we can find a constructive path forward, Ms. Morgan." Alistair ended the call with a polite but neutral acknowledgement. As she hung up, she wondered if the seeds of real change were sprouting, or if this was merely the airport's attempt to avoid negative PR and financial fallout. A week later, Alistair sat in a stately hearing room on Capitol Hill, her heart thrumming. The committee hearing had drawn more attention than anticipated. The usual array of politicians filled the dais, but the gallery seats were packed with representatives from major airports, lobbyists, journalists, and members of civil rights organizations. Cameras flashed as Alistair moved to the witness table. Senator Atwater kicked off the session. "We're here today to discuss the proposed guidelines linking airport funding to mandatory staff training and accountability. Ms. Alistair Morgan is among our invited speakers." A ripple of whispered chatter moved through the room. Alistair felt a trickle of sweat slide down her back. She fiddled with the microphone before her. She had testified in hearings before, but never with this level of personal stake. "Thank you, Senator Alistair," began her voice steady. "I present to this committee the outline for what we call the Passenger Dignity and Security Act. These measures are designed to ensure that while we maintain robust security, we also uphold the rights and dignity of travelers. In the past weeks, I've come forward about my personal encounter with discriminatory treatment at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. I want to emphasize that my experience is emblematic of many. We have a duty to rectify this." She proceeded to detail the proposed measures, weaving in real-world examples. She pointed out that security and dignity are not mutually exclusive. She argued that well-trained, unbiased staff could more effectively identify genuine threats rather than being distracted by personal prejudices. After her testimony, various committee members asked clarifying questions. Some expressed concerns about cost feasibility or the scope of the training. Alistair answered each query calmly, backing her points with data from both her philanthropic work and tighten locks experiences in high-security environments. As Alistair finished, Senator Atwater announced a short recess. She invited Alistair into a private chamber where a handful of top officials awaited, among them an Undersecretary of Transportation and Alec Matthews, the liaison from Homeland Security. Matthews spoke first. "Ms. Morgan, we've read your proposal. It's thorough. We believe it can be transformative. We'd like to fast-track this initiative. But we need your support not just as a figurehead, but as someone who can guide the practicalities." Alistair's breath caught. "That's a big request. I'm flattered, but I also have my business to run." The Undersecretary stepped forward. "We're not asking you to quit Titan Lock. We'd like you to head a special task force on a consultant basis overseeing these compliance measures nationwide. You'd have a team, of course." Alistair's eyes widened. The scope of this was massive. She felt a swirl of excitement laced with apprehension. If she accepted, she could directly shape training programs and accountability structures for airports across the nation. This was a rare chance to bring about large-scale reform. Before she could respond, Senator Atwater clapped her on the shoulder. "Take your time, Alistair. You don't have to decide today. But we'd be delighted to have you in that role." Alistair nodded, a sense of destiny nudging her. She remembered her mother's words yet again. "Walk like you own the place, but never forget who you are." Back in Atlanta, the leadership at Hartsfield-Jackson was in crisis mode. A series of internal memos bounced between departments, all referencing Alistair Morgan's testimony and the proposed Passenger Dignity and Security Act. The airport's multi-billion-dollar modernization project was on the line. If Alistair's measures passed and the airport was found non-compliant, or if the spotlight remained on them as a hotbed of discrimination, the funds could be drastically reduced or cut off entirely. Officer Carter, for his part, found himself suspended pending investigation. Rumors floated that the disciplinary committee was leaning toward termination. He was no longer the only one on the chopping block. Other officers with a history of complaints faced intensified scrutiny. The union bristled, but the airport's top brass signaled they were in no mood to protect officers who'd crossed the line. In a small, windowless office, Andrew Powell and Henry Monroe tried to salvage the airport's reputation. They drafted press statements, promising full cooperation with any federal task force. They also reached out again to Alistair Morgan's representatives, offering a formal public apology, a face-to-face meeting, and the establishment of a new internal diversity council. Yet Alistair's schedule was packed. She had multiple interviews lined up with national media outlets who wanted her perspective. Public sentiment quickly rallied around her story. Media headlines read, "Black woman called security threat for asking water. Now she's shaking up airport funding." The story of Alistair's humiliating experience struck a chord with travelers of all backgrounds who'd ever felt the sting of injustice at an airport. Civil rights groups praised Alistair, while some conservative commentators accused her of wielding her influence to punish an entire airport for the misconduct of a few. The debate raged across social media. A month later, Alistair found herself back in Atlanta for a high-stakes meeting with Hartsfield-Jackson officials. The meeting took place in a sleek conference room high above the bustling terminals. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Alistair could see planes taxiing, their engines roaring. She remembered the day she had come here, just looking for a drink of water, never imagining the far-reaching consequences. Powell greeted Alistair in the lobby with a strained smile. A few other executives joined them, including a representative from the mayor's office. They guided Alistair to a seat at the head of a long conference table. "Thank you for coming." Miss Morgan. Powell began clearing his throat nervously. We wanted to update you on the steps we're taking to address the situation. Alistair listened calmly as Powell enumerated new training modules, revised standard operating procedures, and an overhaul in the complaint resolution process. He also confirmed that Officer Carter had been dismissed following a thorough investigation of Alistair's case and previous complaints lodged by other passengers. We recognize we failed you, Powell concluded, and we aim to do better. We would also like to formally apologize. Alistair tapped her fingers on the polished surface of the table, a cascade of reflections bouncing off it. She wasn't here just for an apology. She wanted systemic change. I appreciate your efforts, she said, her tone poised. But you realize that the federal funding in question, the $3.5 billion, has new strings attached thanks to the Passenger Dignity and Security Act. How do you plan to ensure full compliance with the mandated guidelines? Powell cast a worried glance at Henry Monroe, who stammered, We have a plan, Miss Morgan. We'll submit quarterly reports to the new task force, showing progress on reducing complaints and implementing mandatory training. We'd be willing to host periodic audits to ensure we're meeting the standards. Alistair nodded. This was precisely the accountability she'd envisioned. Good. And the new Internal Diversity Council. How will it function? Monroe perked up. We're forming a board of staff members, community leaders, and an independent civil rights advocate. Their role is to review any discrimination complaints, make recommendations for improvements, and ensure transparency. Alistair's expression softened slightly. That's a step in the right direction. But I'll be candid, if these efforts prove to be more about optics than genuine reform, the federal task force, and I personally will push for funding sanctions. Powell nodded vigorously, sweat beading at his temple. Understood. We are taking this very seriously, Ms. Morgan. A quiet hush settled over the room. Alistair took a moment to look around, noticing the tension etched on the officials' faces. She felt a pang of empathy. Change was never easy, and losing billions in funding would devastate the airport, costing jobs and stalling improvements. Still, Alistair believed those billions could only be ethically allocated if the airport truly earned them through fair and responsible practices. They talked for another hour, ironing out details. As Alistair rose to leave, Powell extended his hand. Thank you, Miss Morgan. She shook it, meeting his eyes steadily. I hope we're turning a new page here. In the weeks that followed, Alistair accepted the role on the federal task force. She balanced it with her obligations at Titan Lock, often burning the midnight oil. The media continued to swirl around her, painting her as either a hero or a tyrant, depending on the outlet. Alistair tried to stay focused on the tangible progress being made. She began receiving messages from other airports, seeking guidance on compliance. The ripple effect was in full swing. Behind the scenes, Alistair's personal life took a toll. She was seldom home, traveling between Washington, Atlanta, and Titan Lock's headquarters in San Francisco. Relationships frayed. Her close friend, Danielle, worried Alistair was overextending herself. Rebecca tried to manage Alistair's calendar, but Alistair insisted on personally overseeing every detail of the new training protocols. Exhaustion crept in, yet Alistair felt an unstoppable drive pushing her forward. It's bigger than me, she reminded herself. One evening, Alistair's father, George Morgan, called her. He was a retired history professor, known for his calm wisdom. Ebbs. I'm proud of what you're doing, he said softly. But don't lose yourself in this fight. Remember that you matter too, not just the cause. Alistair teared up at her father's gentle admonition. She realized she was on autopilot, fueled by a righteous sense of indignation and ambition to fix a broken system. Had she lost sight of self-care, of the little joys outside the fight for justice? "I hear you, Dad," she whispered. "I'll take care of myself." As Alistair's new guidelines began rolling out, the tide turned sharply against those who had enabled or participated in discriminatory practices. At Hartsfield-Jackson, internal audits revealed a nest of complaints that had been dismissed or trivialized by certain managers. One by one, those managers either resigned or were removed. The headlines roared, "Airport shake-up continues. Management purge follows investigation." Officer Carter became a scapegoat in the public narrative. Former colleagues distanced themselves, blaming him for the avalanche of scrutiny. Without a stable income, Carter found himself struggling. The community also turned its back on him. He tried to blame Alistair Morgan for his predicament, venting in an ill-conceived social media rant. But the post only fueled more backlash against him, reinforcing the public view that he had mistreated travelers for far too long. Hard karma, indeed. At the same time, Alistair learned that while Carter had been the spark, many others at the airport were complicit in small or large ways. They faced suspensions, terminations, or mandatory retraining. Some felt it was a much-needed reckoning. Others felt it was too harsh. Alistair tried to balance the complexities. The aim was not just punishment, but genuine cultural change. Nevertheless, the disciplinary measures, coupled with the intense media spotlight, sent a strong message: discriminatory behavior would no longer be tolerated. Alistair watched from her vantage on the task force, both relieved and sobered by the scope of the shift. Real lives and livelihoods were being impacted, but so was the dignity and security of countless passengers who deserved equitable treatment. 6 months later, Alistair stood in Terminal A of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, gazing at the newly installed signage that read, "Passenger Advocacy Desk, here to help." A friendly face, a middle-aged woman wearing a passenger advocate badge, greeted Alistair with a smile. Alistair introduced herself, beaming with pride as she saw the changes in action. She proceeded through security under the watchful eyes of newly trained TSA officers. Gone was the scowl of suspicion. In its place was a more courteous, consistent approach. She even spotted Officer Hernandez, the woman who had tried to help her that fateful day. Hernandez was now wearing a silver pin that read "Excellence in Customer Care." Alistair couldn't help but smile. The journey had been tumultuous, riddled with confrontation and sleepless nights, but it had led to meaningful reform. The $3.5 billion in modernization funds had ultimately been released contingent on ongoing audits and compliance. Hartsfield-Jackson was well into a major facelift, improved screening technology, comfortable waiting areas, and a staff training program that was fast becoming the new industry standard. A chunk of the funding was also allocated to local job opportunities, echoing Alistair's vision of uplifting communities. True to Alistair's philanthropic roots, she ensured that some portion of the new airport project's contracts went to minority-owned businesses, leveling the playing field in yet another dimension. 6 months had passed since Alistair Morgan's harrowing experience at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The changes instituted under the Passenger Dignity and Security Act were in full swing, and Alistair herself had taken on a consultant role with the newly formed federal task force overseeing compliance at airports nationwide. Her days were a whirlwind of policy reviews, training evaluations, and press briefings, but she remained resolute in her mission. Now she found herself stepping back into the very airport where it had all begun. Terminal A of Hartsfield-Jackson, under vastly different circumstances. Instead of warily scanning the faces of TSA officers, Alistair walked with a quiet confidence, noting the visible transformations the airport had undergone. Gone were the faded posters about security procedures. In their place were vibrant banners that read, "Respect Safety Service for every traveler" in bold letters. Beneath them, a short paragraph explained the rights of passengers and what to do if they felt mistreated. It was a far cry from the tense atmosphere Alistair remembered. As she moved through the corridor, she spotted a newly installed kiosk labeled Passenger Advocacy Desk, here to help. A middle-aged woman with curly black hair sat behind the desk, sporting a visitor-friendly smile. She wore a badge that read, "Passenger Advocate," in large block letters, and Alistair couldn't help but grin at the sight. She recalled how, not too long ago, a simple request for water had almost made her feel like a criminal. Now an entire desk was dedicated to ensuring that no traveler felt unjustly targeted or humiliated. "Good morning," the woman said, her warm tone a balm to Alistair's lingering memories. "Good morning," Alistair replied. "It's wonderful to see the changes here. We're really proud of the new program," the advocate answered. "Are you traveling today or just visiting Alistair?" Tipped her head in acknowledgement. "A bit of both, actually. I have a flight in a couple of hours, but I'm also here to observe how these reforms are taking shape." A flicker of recognition passed over the advocate's face. "You're Ms. Morgan, aren't you? The one who testified before the Senate Committee on the Passenger Dignity and Security Act?" Alistair's cheeks warmed, but she nodded. "Guilty as charged." "Thank you," the advocate said, eyes glistening with sincerity. "I used to be a gate attendant here, and I've seen my share of unfair incidents. This new system feels like a fresh start for all of us." Alistair felt a knot in her throat. She thanked the woman and moved on. Just a few steps away, a group of TSA officers guided travelers through one of the updated checkpoint lines. She noticed the streamlined security machines, cutting-edge scanners that Titan Lock had helped vet for cybersecurity vulnerabilities. But the biggest change was in the demeanor of the officers themselves. Their faces weren't etched with suspicion or impatience. Instead, they calmly directed passengers, answering questions instead of snapping at them. A gentler environment, Alistair realized, often made the overall process run more smoothly. Suddenly, one of the officers waved at Alistair. She did a quick double-take before recognizing the petite frame of Officer Hernandez, the very same officer who had originally tried to help Alistair get water months before. Hernandez had a new silver pin on her uniform that read, "Excellence in Customer Care." Hernandez walked over, smiling. "Ms. Morgan, it's good to see you again." Alistair returned the smile. "It's great to see you too. I hear congratulations are in order." Hernandez touched the pin lightly. "Yeah, I got an award last month for going above and beyond in customer service. Management said it was part of the new recognition program for positive interactions. Honestly, things have been a lot calmer since these changes took effect. Less tension, fewer confrontations." Alistair recalled her own humiliating ordeal in front of everyone, being forced to remove her shoes and undergo a lengthy pat-down just for asking for water. Now, standing here in the middle of a bustling security area, she felt a sense of relief. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserved it," she said. "I remember you tried to help me in the first place." The two women chatted a bit about the new training protocols, how the staff had responded, and the fact that complaints had dropped dramatically in recent months. Then Alistair excused herself and returned to the main concourse. She passed by a row of digital advertising screens displaying airport announcements. One ad caught her eye: committed to equal treatment and cutting-edge security. Hartsfield Jackson, leading the way. Alistair paused in front of it, reflecting on how half a year ago she'd stared at these same screens while trying to swallow her outrage. Her phone buzzed in her purse. It was a text message from Rebecca, her ever-diligent assistant. "Hey boss, remember your flight boards in 90 minutes. Gate A21. Also, the press wants a quick comment about your visit. CNN has a crew near the lounge area." Alistair sighed, amused at how quickly news travelled within airports. Since the story of her water request turned discrimination fiasco had broken on national media, Alistair had become something of a public figure, symbolizing both the everyday traveller facing discrimination and the powerful executive influencing billion-dollar funding. She texted back, "Thanks, Rebecca. On my way." Yet before she headed to the lounge, Alistair made a detour to an elegantly designed water fountain, conveniently located near a newly renovated restroom. It had sleek stainless steel spouts and a digital readout indicating it was filtered and safe to drink. Above the fountain was a small plaque in partnership with the Morgan Justice Foundation, improving traveller comfort and community health. Alistair felt a tremor of pride seeing her foundation's name. During the negotiations for modernization funds, she had successfully advocated that a small portion be allocated to enhanced passenger amenities, everything from hydration stations to child-friendly play areas. It was a subtle but meaningful victory, symbolizing the principle that airports should serve everyone with dignity and care. She took a sip of cold water, relishing the moment. The irony was not lost on her. The very act that had sparked this monumental journey was now quietly honored by this new fountain. As she drank, her mind drifted back to those sleepless nights, drafting policy proposals and fielding pushback from skeptical airport executives. She remembered the personal sacrifices, the frustration of seeing negative headlines painting her as a billion-dollar bully in some corners of the media. Despite it all, she had pressed forward, fueled by the belief that one voice combined with strategic action could set massive changes in motion. From behind, a gentle voice broke her reverie. "Ms. Morgan, I'm sorry to bother you." Alistair turned to see a middle-aged man in a casual blazer. He held a cell phone timidly. "Would you mind if I took a quick picture? My sister is a TSA officer, and she's really proud of the reforms you helped usher in. She'd love to see you." Alistair smiled. "Of course." She posed briefly, then shook the man's hand. He thanked her profusely and hurried off. Alistair looked around. A few other travelers glanced in her direction, seeming to recognize her. She acknowledged them with a nod, but decided to maintain a low profile. She preferred genuine interactions over playing the celebrity. Finally, she made her way to Gate A21. The entire terminal shimmered with new updates, energy-efficient lighting, improved signage, wide walkways. She could see the boarding gate staff calmly helping passengers, occasionally joking to keep the mood light. The improvements were not just structural, but cultural, and Alistair felt gratitude well up inside her. Looking out the terminal's massive windows, Alistair watched planes taxi along the runway. She thought about all the people who had unwittingly joined her in this unfolding drama. Officer Hernandez, who had tried to help. Officer Carter, whose overreach led to his own downfall. Henry Monroe and Andrew Powell, the administrators forced to confront long-standing issues in their ranks. Each had played a role in the airport's metamorphosis. She also thought about her parents. Her mother's mantra, "Walk like you own the place, but never forget who you are," resonated more than ever. Alistair had walked forward that fateful day, refusing to be broken by an unjust system. And in refusing, she had inspired the system to bend. Her father's caution to care for herself echoed too. She had promised him she would taking short breaks now, enjoying small moments like sipping cold water from a brand new fountain. Her phone buzzed again, this time a reminder from her calendar. Board in 20 minutes, flight to Washington, D.C. Alistair tucked her phone away. Yes, she would board soon and head back to D.C. for another round of discussions with the task force. There was always more to do, more updates to oversee, more voices to uplift. Change, she had learned, was never a one-and-done affair. It was an evolving process requiring vigilance and consistent effort. Still, as she settled into a nearby seat to wait for her boarding group, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She watched families shuffle by with strollers, business travelers rolling suitcases, and college students wrestling with overstuffed backpacks. Every person here carried a story, a destination, a purpose. And now, thanks to these reforms, they were also carrying the promise of a more respectful, equitable journey. In her heart, Alistair knew this was just one chapter in a larger narrative, one in which countless people had pushed for fairness, often without the benefit of a spotlight. She had simply become a catalyst, demonstrating how a single confrontation could grow into a rallying cry for national reform. Looking at the hustle and bustle around her, she felt both the weight of responsibility and the uplifting knowledge that real progress had been made. Flight 284 to Washington, D.C. is now pre-boarding, crackled the overhead announcement. Alistair rose, collecting her carry-on and laptop bag. With one last glance around the transformed terminal, she began making her way toward the boarding line. The memory of humiliation was still there, lodged deep, but it was overshadowed by the tangible proof of change. New policies, new facilities, and a renewed sense of dignity for every passenger who walked these halls. Thus Alistair stepped onto the jet bridge, carrying forward her mother's words and her own unyielding conviction. She was leaving behind an airport vastly different from the one that had once mistreated her, but she knew the work was never truly done. There were always more airports to inspect, more staff to train, more hearts to win over. As the plane's engines revved, Alistair felt a surge of energy, a sense of resolution flooding through her. Because sometimes, all it takes is one resolute voice and a single request for water to topple barriers and transform an entire system one terminal at a time. Thank you for joining me on this powerful journey of how a simple request for water ignited a fight for justice, reshaped one of America's busiest airports, and secured better treatment for all travelers. Alistair Morgan's story proves that when one courageous voice stands up to discrimination, extraordinary change can follow, even if it means shaking loose billions of dollars in funding and facing down powerful institutions. If you found inspiration or strength in this tale, don't let the conversation end here. Hit that like button, share this video with friends and family who need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel to stay connected. Your support helps keep these stories alive and sparks more conversations about fairness, equality, and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right. Thank you for watching, and remember, every voice has the power to make a difference.